Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And once again, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to the 2013 Southern African Indaba. My name is Kudzaisha Pasiri, aka Pastor. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. Our second moderator, who is going to be taking questions, is Ms. Nani Mbaba from South Africa. So if you have any questions during the proceedings, please pass them this way and they will find their way to Nandi. Also, a shout out to our sound technicians, Mr. Ashraf Musa from Malawi, and Jeffrey Kanyama, aka Magavelli, from Zambia. And for the sake of those who have not read the bios of these wonderful people, we will give them each 30 seconds to introduce themselves. We'll start here.
My name is Dianna Games. I'm an analyst and consultant on African business, and I'm formerly a journalist. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I've just I still do a lot of writing for the media. I've just published a book on business in Africa, and I'm the honorary CEO of the South Africa-Nigeria Chamber of Commerce.
Hello, my name is Andrew, and I'm actually from Zambia. I work at Absa Capital in banking. I did my undergraduate in the US. I went to Harvard. I graduated in 2010.
Good morning, I'm Swaady Martin-Leke. I'm from Côte d'Ivoire. I founded last year a company called Iswara, which is a luxury, authentic luxury African company. And before that, I was in corporate working for GE for about 11 years. And I'm very excited to be here today.
Hello, my name is Elvis Terigin. I'm from Kenya. I'm also a recent graduate. I left Harvard in the year 2010. Currently working here with JP Morgan Chase in the investment banking division.
Hello, my name is Mamadou Toure. I'm from Cameroon. I'm managing director with General Electric in charge of sales and project finance for Africa. That's about it. And I've been traveling and working across the continent for the past 17 years, I think. Okay, I also happen to be the founder of Africa 2.0, which is an organization for working on a vision for Africa.
Hi, I'm Gluckman. I am South African. I'm currently finishing up my law articles at Edward Sonnenberg's, UCT graduate. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, panel, for your time. Audience, a round of applause for our panel. Okay, let's dive right into it. So our first question today, what do you think is the most exciting thing about Africa today? We can start with anyone. Oh,
I'll just start. I think the most exciting thing about Africa today is we're able actually as Africans to shape the continent we want to live in and to shape the future of our continent. And I think there's very few places in the world where there's so much to do and where you can really see in your lifetime your contribution.
If I may, I don't know, who of you have read Outliers? Okay, excellent. Major number of you guys. So, if you read Outliers, you'll see that in a section of the book, they explain that the wealthiest people in human history were born in a certain place, in a certain time, right? Between 1840 and 1865 in the US, the Rockefeller, etc. Now, my view is that we happen to be in that situation, but in Africa now. So the people who have been born, let's say between, let's put 75, So 72 and let's say 2000 happened to be born in a place of the richest continent ever with the greatest attention from the planet. So I think that's the most exciting part today, being born in the right place, in the right time, and having the opportunity to have the key responsibilities in a tipping point time for the whole continent and possibly for the rest of the planet. Thank you.
And just to add on that, I think what's really exciting now is that what we're seeing is a change in mentality where we actually have recognized that we are in a place where a tipping point is about to occur. And there's a lot of us taking the initiative to make that tipping point actually happen. And there's a shift in the African consciousness about the power that we actually have. And that's, for me, is what's most exciting right now.
All right, I'll take it from here. I think for me, the thing that's really exciting is the fact that Africa is young. There's a lot that we can take from the outside world, from other places. And I think there's a lot that we, in our positions, can sort of take from different parts of the world and bring it to us. I mean, look at democracy, it's still growing. Look at the economy, there's so much potential out there. So there's just a little bit of things that we can emulate from other parts of the globe and try to pick up the good and the bad and then take it from here.
Yeah, and just to add on that, and what Andrew just said, since we are in a region that's underdeveloped compared to the rest of the world, you are taking technologies and processes that have been mastered in another region and applying it to a region that's basically you're learning a new process and taking that thing that people in Europe have been using for ages or for a couple of decades, and you're applying it to a new region and learning new ways of doing it and perfecting it. That's one of the most exciting things. For me, for instance, in the finance industry, you're taking a trading strategy or some selling strategy that's been mastered in Europe, but you can't really apply it wholesome in Africa, and you have to learn new ways of doing it and new ways of applying it to a more underdeveloped region. It's a pretty exciting project.
Okay, I just want to mention two things that I've seen, and of course I'm a very different generation from all of you, well maybe one or two others in the room. And the one thing is technology and the way that has, I think that's been a real game changer for Africa. Not just mobile phones, but technology in general, the way people can connect, because we're still not that connected geographically, really. And I think that technology has enabled Africans to learn about each other in a way that wasn't possible, and that certainly when I was young was not happening. I think the second thing that I've seen is really the growth of African companies. And that's changing two things. One is the way of doing business in Africa. It's becoming a lot more transparent, and as I said, I think technology is a big part of that. But I think also people as economies are growing and becoming more successful, I really see people being proud of what their countries are producing, the kind of businesses that are coming out of those. If you look at M-Pesa in Kenya, for example, there's a real pride in some of these African homegrown products, goods and services.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of Ghana. And I'm sure you are all very well-traveled people. Some of you have studied outside the continent and so forth. But the next question is, what do you think is Africa's it factor? What makes Africa a whole lot more exciting as compared to the developed world, the upcoming environment versus the developed environment? We can start with.
Well, I still have the microphone, so I'll just kind of carry on. I think the youth, and I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here today, but I think that there's a whole new way of thinking about Africa that's coming through from young people who are looking to establish, as we heard from other panelists, a new kind of Africa. And for me, that is the fact that so much is untapped, and there are such huge opportunities, so many gaps in so many things that people can plug into quite easily.
If I can use a metaphor, assume you have a sheet with a lot of text on it, and another sheet where you have a blank sheet. So, and you've been asked to write something on it. Why would you be more comfortable to write something on the blank sheet? So I think that's where Africa is today. It's pretty much of a blank sheet, where whatever can come out of your mind in terms of building something, the opportunity, the space, the environment, still needs to be improved though, but that's another topic. At least you have that blank sheet to mark your time, your environment, your people, etc. And I think that's the most exciting part. Having worked in Europe, I'm not going to get into the glass ceiling, etc., but the reality is, you know, when you think of wanting to do something, there were a million limitations for you to actually get them done, right? And that was the frustrating part. I'm obviously being an African in a Western world had also its own challenges, but the reality was, when you have a chance to do something where not much has been done, it's much easier to do. Now, clearly, the environment is something that needs to be improved in Africa, but by the moment that environment becomes an enabler, then the sky is the limit.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. I completely agree with Mamadou. I think if you, and I guess just talking about yourselves, the reality is that in Africa, you might be special in some ways, but the reality is, if you take the global world, there are so many people like you. And I think having gone to ALA is a privilege as an African, and I think it's also a responsibility to be able to make a change in Africa. In the world, you might end up being lost somewhere, and for various reasons. One, because there are many more like you, and second, also, there is a glass ceiling. It is true. I think it's very easy to look around and read how many successful Africans, or I would say change makers, because I think you can be successful financially, but I think what's important is, are you making a change in your lifetime? And how many Africans have been able to actually make those changes outside of their continent? And I guess that's a question that you want to ask yourself all the time as you are overseas. Just learn as much as you can. And also refine your vision of Africa. Because we always complain. We complain of the poverty, we complain of the dirty roads, we complain of the lack of democracy, we're complaining for a lot of things, but what are we actually doing to change those things? And I think it's very easy to sit somewhere very far, being very successful again financially, and being very comfortable and be complaining about Africa. I would say you have to be also very realistic. Operating in Africa is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. And I think for you guys, you're going to have the opportunity and all kinds of offers to do wonderful things outside of the continent. But it will happen one day that you'll ask, because I think that's really the moment of truth. What have I done actually in my life, you know? Did I just accumulate wealth, or was I a game changer? And I think, as Mamadou said, I think now is the time for Africa, and don't miss it. Otherwise, you'll just have regrets, and you might be again successful financially, but you wouldn't have made really a difference on this continent.
There's a couple of things which I want to say, and that is, what is so exciting at this point is that Africa is this virgin territory, this blank space which we can all make our mark, and that's great. But there's something else which I find amazing about Africa, and that we have such unique problems, and those problems require solutions. And M-Pesa is a great example of a problem which solution really has revolutionized the way we think about banking. And that's amazing about Africa, is that we have unique problems to be solved by Africans. Because, and then that touches on the social consciousness point of it, is that as Africans, we know our problems, and we know that our problems are so fundamental, and we want to change them, and we have that social consciousness in all of us, and with the opportunity to change that, bridging social consciousness and innovation and entrepreneurship, Africa is like a perfect breeding ground for that. So it's nice that we have problems that we want to change. So it's brilliant.
I think for me, if you look at all the different parts of the world, they've all sort of gone through cycles. And I think what's coming to my mind now is that I think this is Africa's time. I mean, just think of all the multinational companies, think of all the people that want to do things in Africa. Because there's a lot more that can be done here. And I think we ourselves are also lucky because we can sort of go out there and come back and even meet new people and tell them, well, there's this in Africa. I mean, I remember when I was studying in my undergrad, we had a lot of American students being interested to learn more about Africa, wanting to do things here, wanting to spend their summers here, just trying to get to understand the continent a lot more. Because I think in their minds also, they thought, well, I mean, Europe is down now, Asia is sort of going through a slump as well. So it's sort of like Africa is that one territory that's sort of left and everyone's sort of drifting towards here.
Okay, thank you once again, panelists. Swaady, and any of you can answer this. You just recently started a company on the continent, and you obviously had a lot of excitement about that project. I can speak for most of the students in this room, they are innovators, they're people who are very excited about starting new things, about starting projects, but many a time they face sort of hurdles along the way. How do you maintain that excitement throughout this whole startup process until your program comes to fruition? Any of you can take this question as well.
I mean, I'm going to give a very practical advice, but also something that has worked very well for me. I have to say I'm extremely focused, but that focus has been there for since actually, it's always been there, but I think it has become very clear and more articulated as I was actually studying, like some of you. What I did, and it was very good advice that a mentor gave me, I designed my skills path. And I thought, as an African studying abroad and living abroad at the time, what is it that I want to do in my life, and especially in Africa, and what are the skills that I would require along the way to be able to achieve what it is that I want to achieve and change on my continent. So I designed a skills path, and it's very visual, but it was in the shape of stairs. And I designed it over a very long period, and I thought, okay, the first 3 years of my career, this is what I want to learn, these are the skills I want to acquire. And basically, just like this, and I think it was probably a period of 15 to 20 years, I've written all the skills that I wanted to acquire along those 20 years, and at the same time, where eventually I wanted to be. And I have my cousin in this room, but from the age of 7, I knew that I wanted to build something. I think as far as I could think of, but I knew that it was not going to happen as soon as I would come out of school. So I thought, if I want one day to build a company, what is it that I need to learn? I need to learn processes, I need to understand finance, I need to understand front end of a company, back end of a company, etc. So I guess for each of you, you'll just have to think about what it is that you want to do, and I think it helps you also to be very patient, and also to be very focused in every situation you are, because you know what it is that, I was very conscious at each moment, each company, each job, what is it that I was here to learn. And what it helped as well, it helped me to always over-deliver and always push and ask and go into the direction of what it is that I wanted to learn. So I think the advantage of that is, I think I have been rarely frustrated in my career. because I was never in a job just because I was in a job. I was in a job because I knew that I'm in this position, this is the skill I want to acquire, and even if it requires me working until 4 in the morning to finish something, dealing with some politics, which can be very disturbing, as you'll see as you grow and grow in your career. There's always a lot of corporate politics or politics as soon as you involve people. But I think if you remain very focused and learn how to push the noise on the side, I think you actually avoid frustration. And I think the same is happening today. It's extremely difficult being an entrepreneur in an African context, but I'm very focused on what is the end goal, what are the things that I want to change. And I think the other thing I would say is you have to be ready to make sacrifices. And I think we all want always the good things, and dealing with Africa, working in Africa, is extremely challenging. And you just have to take things with humor. And I think that will help you along the way, because things are not always to go as fast as you want, are not going to be as efficient as you want. You're going to face, corruption situation, all kinds of very difficult situation humanly. And I think if you remain focused, that's what's going to drive you.
It's very important in terms of how to improve yourself. You need to really all the time understand that you're a work in progress. I think she did it on a 3-year cycle. Personally, I did it on a 10-year cycle, because I kind of picked all the weaknesses in my personality that I need to work on, and I knew that it would take me 10 years to actually overcome them. So she's covered everything, and I think maybe one thing that is more to you guys, you part of the elite. And as part of the elite, there are very, very important things that you have to deal with. And I'll take a personal story. So when I arrived in France, my dad is a musician, so he told me, look, you're going to have to be twice as better as anyone else in this place because you're not from here. So clearly hard work was no other option. But more importantly, one day the principal called my parents, it was junior high school, to go to senior high school. And he told my parents, your kid shouldn't stay in this school. And my mother was like, why shouldn't he stay in this school? He's top of his class. Okay, he's very turbulent, but you're not going to fire him. And the principal said, no, the problem of your kid is that he's extremely bored. So you need to, you might lose him out of his boredom. So you need to send him in that special high school, which I was the only black kid in that school. And for the first time in my life, I had to deal with failure. So I didn't fail, I was no more top of my class. So all those guys had done the program 2 years ahead, all their parents were like scientists, researchers, and my first exam, I was like in the middle of the class, like number 20th in the ranking. For me, it was like, this is not possible, how can I? And I'm telling you that, it helped me deal with the fact that you need to accept that you're not always going to be the best, but what you need to deal with is always be the best you can be. And that was the best. I mean, I ended up not being so bad in the school, but really I had to deal with failure, with the fact that I'm no more the #1 without doing anything. So, and in life actually, especially as an entrepreneur, you have to accept that it might not be perfect the first time, that what you're working on will be improved as you go, and that others are not here to take you down, but they're your teachers. Your enemies are your teachers, the environment are your teacher. And as you progress into those things, you end up with this philosophy that is very key, and I think is Madiba who said it, our greatest glory is not in never falling, but is in rising every time we fall. And entrepreneurship, I started actually, I'm not an entrepreneur per se, let's say I'm a serial social entrepreneur. I started my first NGO, I was 19. Actually, you remember those years. So it was an organization of young African students across Europe in top elite school to kind of work out how to bring back capacity into Africa. I mean, the beginnings were tough. You know, people were like, "What is this thing?" etc. But you know, we didn't give up. Many of us now are in very, you know, key positions across Africa, and we carried on. You know, our first gathering was not so great. We thought nobody liked what we did, and it grew. It grew, and that's very important. When you start something, it's not perfect on day one. You know, it's a long-term game. You're gonna face people who tell you no. You know 3M, Steve Jobs. Everyone told them your idea is crap, right? It's not gonna work. Don't take no for an answer. And I'm saying that because you know, for many of my friends who were, let's say, academically good, let's say not too bad, right? There was this hiatus between, okay, I'm just going to be a good corporate guy because it's safer, and because I don't want to take a risk or fail, I won't go into that route. What has changed, I think, in the upcoming generation is that, you know, entrepreneurs are not just the ones who didn't have any other choice than to start a business. What we actually need now is people like Swaady, who got the skills, who got the experience, the network, and can start a business, because those are the successful businesses. So, you know, from a personal experience, those would be the few words I would add into your path.
I just want to say something quickly, and that is there's a project that's currently running in South Africa called the Awetu project. And what this project does, I mean, for me, it's exactly what you're talking about, which I think is so brilliant, and that is the idea of using entrepreneurship as a way to uplift social differences and social kind of, basically, instead of going into corporate and then kind of living out that corporate life, is taking the risk and opening a business, being an entrepreneur, hiring people, creating jobs. And for me, this is the future of Africa, and the future of this country especially, is us saying, let me grab the skills I can take, don't stay too long, get out and make the world a better place, or make something which I want to create to uplift others. And I think that's the future. I've quit my job, actually, by the way. This is what I'm doing next year, so. Thanks.
I was also just going to say, again, for you guys, is you have to be very aware that you're not on the same timeline as your classmates in all the schools you are. You know, wherever you are studying right now, you know, whether you're in the US, in the UK, wherever you are, your classmates have a very different, I would say, journey. Your journey is actually to learn a lot, very quickly, so you can come back to the continent and use that knowledge that you have acquired. So don't think again you have the same timeline. What they're going to learn in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you actually need to learn in half of the time, because I would say your career timeline is double. There is a moment to learn outside, and there is a moment to come back. And you're not going to come back when you're 40 or 30. I mean, first of all, you have to pay back ALA, but most importantly, you have just to make sure you've acquired the most skills that you can, because unfortunately, it is true on the continent. In terms of things that we are exposed to, it's not as vibrant as what you would be exposed to outside of Africa. Just because we don't have, I would say at a large scale, the type of academia, the type of research, the type of companies, even the social environment. We're on a continent where most of the population is not well educated. So it's a very different environment from where most of you are today. So just learn as fast as you can and as much as you can, and then just come back.
I was going to say something. I mean, other than just the academics part of it, the one thing that you can actually do a lot more also is just to try to network. I mean, I'm assuming most of you are at international schools where you actually study with a lot of students from all parts of the world. And so, like, I mean, I have talking from experience, I have my college roommate is from Singapore, and now he's back in Singapore and he's actually teaching SATs and some other prep stuff for students. But he's always constantly asking me what's going in Africa, what's happening in Africa, because he's interested to learn a lot more. He wants to invest in Africa. So that's something also you should sort of look into, because you might have friends being scattered all over the world that might be interested in Africa, and you could be the bridge between what they want to do, etc.
A lot of what I wanted to say has actually already been said, but I think I just want to re-emphasize the point about, there's no contradiction necessarily between being a job seeker and an entrepreneur. I've worked in, my profession is journalism. I've been in newspapers in a corporate environment for a long time, and I've worked on my own for the past 12, 13 years. So I think that it is wise to take the skills and to build the networks and do everything you can before you branch out, because that brings me to the second point. And I think it's all, I've been talking around the country this week, and with somebody, one of the panelists was from MTN, and he said, Africa is not a warm and fuzzy place, so if things start feeling too warm and fuzzy, you better watch out, maybe something's gone wrong. So I think that, it's fair to say there's a lot of challenges, and we are operating with a blank slate in some ways, but in some ways we're not. And the part that's not a blank slate is still a huge challenge. I mean, the environment for doing business, getting money, the politics, some of these sort of, a lot of potholes along the way. And so the thing is to not be discouraged, because everybody is suffering through those, and that is starting to change quite quickly. So, but just to say, don't let optimism rule everything, because there's a lot of challenges out there as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we're going to engage with our audience for a while and take some questions.
One of my pet peeves with Africa's economy is the focus on primary and secondary industry. For example, if forecasts are true and the oil reserves run low by 2070, countries like Nigeria and Libya would be in dire straits. My question is why multinational companies in Africa focus on just primary industry or the economic side of things, like banking or management, and not the cutting-edge technology that will be the lifeblood of the future economies.
May I? Okay. So, is in the room or? Okay, thank you. So first, so you know, GE is a technology company, right? As a technology company, we thrive to push as much as possible knowledge, science, and awareness. She will confirm. So just to give you a few examples, I just came back from Nigeria. So in the space of 2 years alone, we've hired 90 application engineers just to be able to serve the market. So that alone is a sign, right, in terms of being committed. In South Africa, we are committing for up to $40 million innovation center, where we'll be hiring engineers, the best in the country, give them exposure in our best learning centers, etc. At the end of the day, what is happening, and you made a good point in terms of primary, secondary. There's only so far you can go with those, because at the end of the day, if there is no power, if there is no water, if there is no road, forget everything else, right? So infrastructure is the next big game in Africa. People may talk about food security, agriculture. If there is nothing to power the tractors or whatever, if there is no road to bring the food in, forget it. So I think there is a kind of general alignment here in terms of giving top priority to infrastructure. The nice thing about infrastructure is that Africa is basically at a crossroad today, right? Either we decide that we're going to go cheap and get a quick fix for infrastructure, or we're going to go and get the best technology that will be long-lasting. But to get the best technology, we're going to need the best engineers. We're going to need to set up plants here. That's another example. Angola, we're setting up the 1G Angola plant. It's around $100+ million investment, where we are basically going to be training people, give them opportunities, etc., and manufacture locally. And when I talk about manufacturing, we're not necessarily talking about the old school dismantled factory from the 40s that we're bringing in the US. State of the art, best in class in GE around the world. Why? Because if this is the next frontier, let's bring whatever is the best and what is available to take this market to the next level, right? So I think there is a consensus, which is global now, in terms of bringing the right infrastructure. I mean, you know, it's nice to drive a nice BMW or a 4x4, but if there's potholes all across, right? It's, you know, it's nice to send, you know, your family to get treated in a hospital in Europe. Why? Because there's no power to power the clinics. Why? Because there's no equipment in those clinics. That's where GE is actually positioning in a different way. So, and we are not alone, by the way. I think we're positioning as a front runner and best in class in terms of leading the way. And when you have a time, feel free to go to the Ghana office, if you're based there, to the Lagos office, to the Nairobi office. You'll see the profile of the management. You would be surprised of how much is being invested in empowering young Africans to take it to the next level. It is recent in terms of decision, I would agree on that, right? But there is a major, major, major commitment that will make this company, I think, very successful in the coming years in Africa. So should you choose the engineering path, please contact us.
I just want to add, you know, to both what Elvis said before and what Mamadou just said. So I spent 11 years in GE, and I was actually the first employee of GE Corporate for Africa. I designed the first strategy for all of the GE businesses for Africa. When I first joined GE in 2001, I made it very clear to my management that you know, what I was here to do was to actually go and do something for Africa and actually bring the best technology that you could find in the world in Africa. But as I explained before, there was a journey. So I couldn't move from just joining GE to actually being given, I would say, the trust to go and make the change. So I worked very hard. I had I would say a very fast career in GE. But most importantly, because I was delivering, I got the trust of my leadership. So when GE decided to go to Africa, actually the CEO of, at that time I was in the US, the CEO of the company told me, you know, GE is going to Africa. And I was so excited, but I was still young, and I thought, okay, you know, maybe not right now is not the right time. But then my CEO actually told the person who was running Africa, this girl loves Africa so much, she's so passionate about it. You know, it's going to be very difficult because at the time we didn't, we did have some operation in South Africa, but we didn't have any offices. But he said, she's so passionate about Africa and she's so strong that I think, you know, if you only have her on your team, you can make things happen. So long story short, I joined GE in Africa, and it was extremely difficult, it's true. But to come back to why I feel it was important also, you know, to have a vision of what it is that you want to bring, even when you're working in corporate and in those big corporations, is that you can also influence the leadership. And I wanted to influence the vision of GE for Africa, and I made it possible by actually being the first person to design the strategies for every single business of GE. But I knew that from the moment I actually joined the company, this is what I wanted to do. By the time I designed the first strategies, and I presented to all of the GE CEOs, the first CEO said, okay, you have to leave corporate, you know, I want you in my business. Because they were just so compelled by the vision. It was bold, but I did my homework, and I also broke down, you need also to understand the organizations you're in. And I know and I knew G very well, so I put it in a way to also just get the buy-in. Got into that business. Within 18 months, the leadership said, okay, your strategy for the business is just like, wow, so actually we want you to run that business for Africa. And when I first got into the job, my CEO said, so Swaady, you're just now running this organization. What is your vision? And I told him, I said at the time, and he's still the CEO, his name is Lorenzo Simonelli, and I said, Lorenzo, I want to actually build G locomotives in Africa. And I think it's going to take me 5 years, but this is what I want to do. Once I've done that, then I can move to another job. And I did that in 18 months. So, which was then, by the time then after that I left G because there was for me nothing more that I could do there, because from the moment I joined G, I decided I would be the person who brings the first manufacturing of a G product in Africa. It was not the first, we did buy a manufacturing plant, but it was the first operation that G set up. And I'm very, I have to say, you have to be very strong, because the first time I was on a conference call, the GM of locomotive and all people who had been in that business for many years were on the call, and I said, we're going to build locomotives in Africa. The head of the locomotives for international literally shouted at me on the phone. He was very rude and said, are you mad? You want us to close our Brazil manufacturing? This is never going to happen. And I was very calm. It's very difficult when you're so young to have actually people shouting at you on the phone and saying, this is absolutely insane. We're never going to do locomotives in Africa. It doesn't make sense commercially. This same person is probably one of the biggest advocates of that project and was the biggest advocate at some point. But I'm sharing this story to say that it's very important that you build a very clear vision of what it is that you want to do, but you also have to be very strong, because it's going to be extremely difficult. And when you come with bold ideas in big companies, which are not African companies at the end of the day, never forget that the Gs, the IBM, the Microsoft, all of these companies are not African. And if you want them, you have to be realistic about what it is that they can contribute to the continent. But at the same time, you have to build a vision for yourself within that company, those companies, because they can bring a lot to the continent, as Mamadou just said. I think she's bringing a lot to Africa, training people. There's so much that can be learned. So I know G is one of the strong supporters of the career. I have to say, I loved every minute I was in G. I learned so much from that organization, but I also gave a lot to this organization. I was told when I started in G that be careful for what you ask, because you might get it. And always, I think that was one advice. The second was always deliver on your next job. You deliver on your current job, but on the next job. So when people think of a promotion, it becomes very obvious that you're the one who can deliver on that. And just give to the company, because I think if you give to the company, they're also good to you in return.
I just wanted to add, as somebody who also works for a multinational, though not a traditional one, I share the same frustration that whenever multinationals come to Africa, they start with the most basic things. But after working at JP Morgan for a while, I understand that these companies have a decision to make with the capital. They have a finite amount of capital that they need to decide on what to do across the world. Now, Africa, if you go to the US, a lot of people still think people live in trees in Africa. So when you're starting from that level of knowledge, you have to first of all convince somebody that you should allocate a bit of the capital that you already have to an African business, to an African country. And there's actually commercial activity going on. There's going to be some return. There's already a high level of risk. They categorize Asia, Europe, Latin America. They have to decide how to allocate their money, and they see that there's a certain amount of risk in Africa. Somebody can expropriate your property. Somebody can just deny you whatever is rightfully yours. So they have to start with the most basic product, the product they're most used to doing, and that they know that it's a sure deal that they're going to get some type of return. And in the process of getting that basic product, they have to hire locals. And that's how, for instance, that's how we come in, right? We are locals, we know product. We come in the basic part, and as they learn about the market, they get more knowledge, that they know that there's actually industries, there's actually a lot of commercial activity going on, and they allocate more and more capital to the region, which leads you from the primary to the secondary activities. And you, as an African, leading that process, you are the one who's educating the whole organization. You're the one who's fighting for allocation of capital to your region. You're the one who's fighting for allocation of employees and more resources to your region. So it has to start from the base. You know, when American companies and European companies started in China, they started making, you know, the most basic stuff. They made pans and spoons and what have you. But now Apple makes all its products in China. You know, it started from the most basic. But as they got to know the products, they got to know the region, and they got to trust the people in the region, then they allocate more and they give you more responsibility, and you move to a higher level of productivity.
Thank you so much, panelists. We have a lot of questions and very little time left, so if you can keep your answers as brief as possible. Next question.
This is from an anonymous member of the crowd from the class of 2009, and it goes to the whole panel. The past 5 decades have been all about African countries developing and remodeling their ideas of what governance is, especially with regards to democracy. The past 3 years have been about revolutions to accelerate this change. What do you think should be our next big focus in Africa, within your line of work and in general, in the next 5 years and 2 decades?
Just from my perspective, coming from a legal perspective, it would be to secure institutions, I think, going through. So we've had revolutions, and we've had change of governments, and we've had new countries formed. And I think now that the new challenge is to secure those institutions. So to make the judiciary as independent as possible, to keep the judiciary independent. So it's these type of institutions which allow for business to thrive, and then for the country to really find its feet and to grow. So that's, I think, is the next challenge in the 5 years, is to secure what has been created.
If I may, I think I've been probably spending the past 37 years of my life trying to find an answer to this question, and I still don't have one, but I'll try a quick one here. If you take the time of independence, what happened was you had a group of African elite who had a common enemy, right? So you basically have 2 ways to unite the people. Either you have a common enemy or you have a common goal. So past independence, what technically, and actually somehow it happened in a way a bit in South Africa to a certain extent. Past that phase, then people started searching for themselves and searching for a soul or a way to go. I think the next real challenge for Africa is really going to be to have a long-term plan. And unless you have that, you then kind of put yourself in the hands of whomever is smarter than you or bigger than you. And take Togo. The GDP of Togo is 7% of the GDP of Manchester. Now, when you have to negotiate with the BRICS, you don't wait much. So one of the key things, and why Africa has become interesting, is because people say there's 1 billion people, there is 60% less than 25, but you're talking about 54 countries. So when people get into the detail, the attractiveness now becomes questionable. So I think our real challenge for this generation is going to be able to find that common goal towards which we work and deliver. And we're really much at a crossroads in terms of identifying that path of working together and looking at where we want to be in 2-3 decades. Think of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. It was one vision to drive in one generation a nation somewhere. Think of Korea, who had the same GDP per capita as Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire. Actually, Cote d'Ivoire was richer then, And 35 years later, is in the top 8 most powerful countries in the world. It came with a vision. It came with a plan. And unless we manage that, I think we are pretty much at a risk of going backwards, because now that everyone is aware of the opportunity, trust me, it might, become a challenge.
Next question, please, ma'am.
This is from Lillian Maboya from South Africa, the class of 2009, and it's directed at Roy Gluckman. She would like to hear more about the Constitutional Law and Bill of Rights program that was delivered to over 4,000 learners in the Western Cape and Gauteng. What motivated the program, and is there room to introduce and grow the program through the current education system?
Thank you. Okay. I'll be brief. I grew up in Sandton, which is a predominantly white area. I went to a predominantly elite white school, and that's how I grew up. That was my background. I went to UCT and I studied business science, and then I studied law, and during studying law, one of our modules was constitutional law, which I went to no lectures for, but had to pass it because I was graduating. So I sat in my room, and for 3 weeks, for 4 weeks, for a month, I sat and I read the whole textbook from back to front, and learning about human dignity and why we have the Constitution and the transformation of South Africa and how we did it and why we did it. I was forced to transform my own self, to deal with my own prejudice, to understand that it was me who had to change in order for the country to change, in order to give effect to the change which we wanted to see. And it was the education which I received then by myself, which I realized had to go to little me's, had to go to me's in high school. I had to hear that education, but never did, never had the opportunity. So I developed the program, and I took it to schools and had to fight to get it into schools, but I managed. And then I just delivered this program in life orientation lessons, and from there we actually wanted to institutionalize that program through an NGO which we started at UCT to get those 27 Bill of Rights and Constitutional Law classes as part of the ALO curriculum. Because I do believe I think it's probably one of the most important educational tools you'll ever have, I think. But it's difficult, because you're dealing with an education department which is not open to discussion. But I do think it is important, and I think I will continue and try and encourage the program and our NGO to continue delivering these programs as much as we can to facilitate and fill that gap.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, the panel, for your time. We are very sorry we could not get through all of the questions, but once more, can we have a round of applause for our panel?